Wow, I hope you enjoyed that fascinating conversation between George Lewis and Tia Denora. And now it's time to open up that conversation as we host a live Zoom discussion where we can take questions.
Actually live, and what we're going to try and do in the next session is discuss some of the issues that George and Tia were talking about, and also take some questions if anybody's got questions. There are so many important, so many current and topical issues that came up in that session. So, and what will also happen is you'll see some Geo players popping in and out of this discussion as well. So they might appear on the screen, and in that Zoom way, we're going to sort of the screens will sort of reshape and reform. So it's a very informal session. We plan to talk for as long as the conversation goes, and then at the end of the session we'll play some music. So just to begin with, I mean, I've got pages and pages of notes here of things, of issues that came up, but I noticed that there was a comment that very much seemed to resonate with what we've been talking about, and it came from Finn Bow. It said, curious about the performative, participative aspects of improvisation, particularly through screens and down the wires. Pleasantly surprised at how this persists, but how does this change performance and practice of improvised music and the other music in everyday life? And how to nurture musical care and attention when there is such a superabundance of musical intrigue and noise. So I think those are a whole lot of important issues there. And Tia, I was thinking that tied in very closely with something that you said right at the start of the talk about the ontology of music as a flexible object, and the way in which music and what we're going through right now is encouraging new forms of consciousness. Because I wondered if that tied up with this aspect of improvising through the screens and down the wires, and how that is changing, is it possibly changing our sense of ourself, our sense of consciousness? And if so, is that related to the ontology of music as a flexible object? So I don't know, is that a good place to start?
Why not? Yeah. Who do you want to start it?
Well, Tia, yeah.
I was afraid of that. It's such a hard, good question. He does ask hard questions. Yeah, I think what I should say is, maybe not everybody who's watching this will know that we're also doing a research project around GIO in looking at it in terms of creative isolation and support. And that was talked about quite a bit in the discussion previous. But one of the things that I think we're all noticing here is how music as a flexible object has adapted, or we have adapted it, or it has adapted us as musicians, or whatever, because it goes to the dance of agency that George Lewis talks about. And one of the clear things that we've been seeing, and you can trace it as you look at the sessions over time, is the emergence of much more of the visual, in terms of the importance of the visual cues and how that kind of compensates. It's like we're always having to compensate, whether we're on Zoom or whether we're live, if the room has a lot of reverb or not, we're always compensating, and we're always adapting the music and adapting to what we can do musically. And I think here, one of the interesting things for me looking at it is, and I'll stop after this first point, is we're all looking at each other, on the flat screen. The visuals become really important. We're looking into these, it's like the doll's house metaphor that we saw in your Theatre of Home piece, lovely Theatre of Home piece last night. We're looking into all these different windows, and we're seeing all these different, you might say, possible realms and ways of being. And they're inevitably giving us new ideas about who we can be, what we're seeing, how we can listen, how we look. It's transforming what we think sound is in music and can be, because it's much more, I think, kinesthetic. At least for me, it has changed it quite a lot. There's the issue of seeing what you're hearing and hearing what you're seeing. And, all of those things play out in perhaps quite individual ways for us. But I suspect that there's quite a lot of, overlap too, because I think we can see it and trace it as it develops as new forms of culture, visual culture and audible culture on the screen.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Does anybody else want to come in on that question?
I think for me, just in thinking about the actual practices, maybe this is very subjective, but I have felt there's been a shift to the practices which were already existent in free improvisation, but were definitely less looked at. And a big thing I always like to hark on about is that how wonderful Maggie and Fig were in bringing this notion of context as performance, and Maggie's idea of the social virtuosity. And to me, that has been such a solid practice and a technique of improvisation, but I don't see it written about and I don't see it taught as much as maybe some other kind of more traditional musical abilities. And so for me, this move to the digital space has been a flourishing for moving to practices which were always at our peripherals, but I think a lot of people were not ready to yet take on board. And so, yeah.
Is it a peripheral thing, or is it the fact that people are prioritizing other ways of communication, or there's a kind of hegemony of practice where other things are valued more in terms of other types of virtuosity as well, social virtuosity? And now we're all on Zoom and the sound's not amazing. Synchronicity is hard. That there's just other ways get a chance to flourish. Sorry for jumping in.
Yeah,
can I just, are we supposed to be live, or are we supposed to be watching you live?
No, this is it, Maggie.
We're all live.
Yeah, we're allowed to come in. I wasn't sure.
No.
I saw Steve and I thought it's probably okay.
No, you're banned.
Why that would do that for you, but anyway. The idea that I'm alive is a novel. Anyway. Please carry on. Maggie's got now frozen. Oh dear. Oh, there you go. Okay.
I was just wondering about, Maria was saying that some practices have been brought from the outside. I'm just wondering if they were always there, or that if you've been taught improvisation or doing improvisation in a conservatoire context, or a university context or a workshop context, people are just choosing to focus on different aspects according to what people's purpose or agenda is. All the time.
I personally see it as an unburdening, and that's obviously my opinion, but I think Zoom has allowed us to be unburdened by those things. That's why I say the periphery, those things were always there, but we've been burdened by these weights, which have not allowed us to investigate those areas because we felt that we had to focus on some kind of skill-based technique hierarchy of elitism, and that is always a little bit on your shoulder, I think. And I think that, for me at least, there's been an unburdening of that, and that's let me flourish in everything else much greater.
Can somebody explain what theopathic is? There's just been a question come in. If there's an undercurrent of theopathic.
Oh yeah. Theopathic discourse within the realm of improvisation. Theopathic?
I'm guessing, but is that
Therapeutic? I don't know.
therapeutic or is it over theorizing?
Oh well.
What is that?
I don't know. Or is it?
Oh wait, here we go.
Oh, religious. Religious. Like theology.
Okay, theology, right.
Theopathy. I love that. Theopathy.
I think for some people it's not just an undercurrent. I think that's at the top. I've read there's some various papers about the sort of spiritual dimensions of improvisation, and there are bits of literature there. You have to kind of go digging for them, but I don't know. I think there are many currents, and this is one of them, and there are many angles, theoretical lenses, agendas, discourses going on, and I think that's what's so fascinating about here and right now, and being able to have all these sort of bubble up and think about, well, how they might work for us, and what yeah. I'm aware I'm talking too much, so I'll pass that on.
You're not.
No, go.
I think that's all I was going to say. We're dealing with many streams of theoretical positions, but also agendas. And I think a point I was thinking about very recently is that improvisation for many years was so marginalized. And now, as it's perhaps coming into the mainstream, we're getting to see some real kind of interesting battles going on here. You know, people wanting to claim it for different reasons and different purposes. And by mainstream, I mean it's being taught in universities. Creativity is now part of a discourse. It's now part of a good thing. Creativity is accepted to be a good thing. Look at the name of our major funding body in Scotland. It's Creative Scotland. Creativity is good. Oh, wait, that's like improvisation. So I'm just going to say one more thing, and then I'm not going to say anything for a while. And it's coming back to a point that Guru made in one of the talks, one of the comments, and it's like, can idealizing positive experiences create a bigger alienation in people who may not immediately identify with what we're experiencing?
Can I just say quickly on that point? It's the same kind of issue when you're talking about teaching improvisation in universities and, you know, creativity with a capital C. Yes, if we start to have ground theories of, you know, exactly what you need to do to feel better, and, you know, we prescribe, do it this way or here, you know, this, there was a comment in the chat earlier about aesthetic Maggie made about, you know, aesthetic supremacists, and I thought that was a wonderful comment. I think there is a great danger if we're
been at the receiving end of them for many decades.
Yeah. There's such a danger if we're over prescriptive about it. But if we step back and we just improvise with people and, you know, give and take little by little, gently, it may not be such a negative thing. I mean, we know there's negative effects that can come out of musical engagement. There's tons of research on that. But it's really a question of, which Gio seems to do so beautifully, of being attentive in a very micro way and listening and having this give and take without saying, this is, you know, eat your cornflakes, they're good for you, you need fiber, or, you know, you have to have more, oh, where's my piece of kale, it's gone, you have to eat more greens, you know. It's not like that.
No, right from the beginning, when people started talking about free improvisation, I remember I did an interview with a magazine called New Dance, who were interested in how free improvisation was working in music, how it could be translated to dance. One of the problems, of course, is you bump into each other in dance. You know, we don't have that problem generally in music, but, you know, just those practical issues. But they made a list of things you should and shouldn't do. I mean, one of them was, of course, you shouldn't play so loudly you can't hear the other person you're playing a duet with. Of course, all the rules were broken by all my heroes. I've seen Han Benink and Misha Mengelberg play duos where Han Benink's played really, really loud for 45 minutes and you can't hear a note that Misha Mengelberg is playing. And it, A, was one of the funniest things I've ever seen, and also B, one of the most exciting and musical things. So it's extremely hard to even make one rule that makes any sense in terms of free improvisation, which is, of course, one of the reasons we love it.
I totally agree.
Thank you, Maggie.
Yeah, exactly. Funny enough, one of my abiding memories is of Han Benink and Michael Moore, and in a different way, they were contrasting. Han is a brilliant clown as well as a fantastic musician, and he was doing, you know, evoking the spirit of Jacques Tati, really, and Michael was playing deadly serious, so lyrical, so sweet. Now, if Michael had got panicked and thought, oh God, I've got to play for laughs, but the fact that I was literally, the contrasting emotions that were coming up as an audience were brilliant. So I think that's absolutely right. I think in our different rhythms together, undiluted. But what Guru says in that sense, they're also, I think, for me, this is why I think workshops or setting up inclusive environments that bring out the best in us is important too, so that people don't feel they're being excluded from some little in crowd. I think that I don't know if that's part of what maybe Guru was talking about, or, you know, so there needs to be, and I think that refers to what you were saying, Una, all the different streams, but also different possibilities. Some people might like to go to Eddie Prevost workshop. Other people might want to come to the gathering. Some people might want to go John Russell's, you know, or they just might want to get together in a room and just do it. And I think it's like the more diversity, the better. Like in nature, biodiversity, we need it. We need it in our communities and in the music, definitely. And nature is a great teacher. I mean, I know the word nature, maybe ecology is a better word, I don't know. But anyway, I agree. I think what Guru's saying is really important. But I think we have to be militant in actually promoting inclusion. But you can't without forcing. Because you were saying also, Guru, in the chat, that you're forced sometimes to teach something that people don't want because it's in the curriculum. But then we're looking at institutional sort of education and how alienating that can be, which isn't the best way to sort of for people to come to improvisation. You will do it as part of the curriculum, and yeah.
It's so hard because
but you teach. You're in university as well, Steve, aren't you? Sorry.
Not anymore. No.
What were you saying?
Said, if we give you money, will you go away, please? And I said, no. It's happened to other people.
Really?
Oh yeah. I could have taken it personally, but it happened at exactly the same time for the best teacher I've ever met. So I thought, okay, it's not about how useless I am. To get back to your point about Michael Moore and Han Benning, I mean, you and I were both talking about duos. And it is much easier, of course, to track those differences and those oppositions and those amusing contrasts when you've only got two people. And of course, it's also like Morecambe Wise or Abbott and Costello. You have a straight guy and a funny guy, and that's, it's all these things tend to lead back to show business, actually, which is fine with me. I'm more interested in show business than, say, God, personally.
That's the title of your next album, actually.
Yeah.
Can I move quickly to a question from PA in Huddersfield? Because I think it's a really important point. We've touched on it already. Can you please define aesthetic supremacists in relation to maybe subcultures of improvisational practice with shared intersubjectivities of quality of musical experience, communication, and movement? So I think, can
I just say something? Because I made the comment. It literally just came in a moment. It wasn't anything theoretical. It literally in the moment, in relationship to what other people were saying. Because I do feel sometimes a lot of the stuff I do is community based, and it's some of the most powerful stuff I experience. And it's not just musicians, although if you can breathe, you're a musician in one sense. So it's that sense that a lot of people, even musicians I love, will probably sort of think, well, that's not worth watching, or that doesn't have the same value as something with skilled players. But I believe in the sort of Fred Astaire thing. Fred Astaire he had some brilliant partners, but Fred Astaire could make anybody look like a brilliant dancer. And I think our responsibility as experienced improvisers, possibly, or I consider, is can we use those skills and that experience to include rather than exclude? Absolutely. So I suppose for me, aesthetic supremacists are those that feel that there is a hierarchy, there's a value. It's just different. I can watch Irena Schweitzer and go, wow, whoa, her skill, her technique, her power, and I love singing with her because she keeps me on my toes. But I can also do something, people like that have just walked in off the street and go, wow, it's just it goes back to what Una was saying. It's just like a different experience, like the work we did with Sonic Bothy, with people with, learning differences, and I think it's this thing of layering it in some sort of pyramid system, that up here is this is the sort of rarefied, has value, and down here, it's sweet, it's quaint, but it doesn't really have value. You're just doing people a favor. That sort of patronizing thing that doesn't recognize. I've learned more in many ways from working with people who are not the most virtuosic in an individualistic sense, like we were saying, that from that social virtuosity, from that collective interplay of different levels of experience in life, as well as music. But I don't know if that was answering the question.
No, sorry,
I don't know if you have a
because I
supremacist.
use that term just in the moment, because it suddenly it came to me how I remember when I was young and being around. There used to be different. I mean, you'll probably remember this, Steve, as well. But it might be there'd be different schools of improvisation and different aesthetic arguments. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, they're slagging off this one, but I really like what they do as well. Or there's something wrong with me. Oh, and I mind you, I never went to university, so I never learned to debate. So maybe that was the problem too. I need to learn how to debate.
No, I think there's no problem there.
There was still the sense that somehow there was missing out on some aesthetic. I felt I was missing out. That I was aesthetically ignorant. I think that's the feeling, that I was ignorant in some way, and that's maybe what I meant. It was a sort of desperate save me from the. It wasn't really a theoretical position. It was just in the moment comment I made, really, I suppose.
But Maggie,
but I suppose it is a position I have as well.
It is, but it actually ties into an idea of a kind of hierarchical position that we have. Like, some people are good improvisers and some people maybe aren't so much, and maybe we go and pay money to go and see the good ones, and we might think that we are community, and we have these ideas of like a kind of horizontal equality and things like that, but there are still things, and I think, you know, or ideals about what's good and what's not, what values we have. So I think we just need to keep interrogating these, stepping back.
I think
absolutely, it's just keep questioning. Yeah.
As a sociologist, the term symbolic violence comes to mind, you know, when you say this is good and this isn't, you know, or even this is improvised and this isn't, you know. Where do you draw the line, and who gets to draw the line? And
who gets to?
Social relations.
Yes, who gets to draw the line?
Because that is very much about the cutting up of the pie of resources. And it seems to me that when I participate in GEO and, you know, observe rather than maybe participate and think about what I see, one of the lovely things here is that it's an object lesson in learning how to appreciate whatever it is, you know, whatever comes out, and making something with it. For me, always the metaphor is cooking. You know, if you've only got potatoes and onions and an egg, well, you know, it's an obvious answer.
Yeah.
And enjoy it. And the point is to learn how to fully appreciate whatever it is, and whether it's, you know, slightly moldy or not, or don't worry about the purity danger side of all that. Just think of what can be done, and how can it work and draw us together. And to me, that seems like what GEO's ethos is. That's what it feels like to someone who comes into.
What does Steve think about this? Because obviously you've been an improviser and in many different situations, and, you know, you've taught, you've had a brilliant career as well. So what's your quality, value, these kind of things?
Well, first of all, thank you for the very encouraging words. I missed out on lots of stuff. I mean, I never saw Thelonious Monk. Maggie met Bill Evans, for God's sake.
Oh,
so jealous. So I never, I very rarely went to John Stevens' workshops, and that was, of course, an incredibly important thing. I mean, anybody who hasn't got a volume of Search and Reflect yet, please look it up. It's an amazing book, and it constantly can be dipped into in terms of getting further insight for the thoughts that you've already had. It chimes on so many levels, I think. But yes, I've worked with lots and lots of different musicians in very different situations. I was never very good as a community worker. That definitely wasn't me. So although I did try that, I didn't get very far in that role. I was just looking at this, which is the program for the Butch Morris conduction tour, because I wanted to know what year we did this in. It's 1997, so that's 23 years ago, and that was a fraught tour in many ways, which I'm not going to go into all the issues there. But Butch Morris, of course, was the guy who really formulated the whole idea of conduction, although he wasn't the guy to put it together in the first place. It looks like Charles Moffat, the drummer with Ornette Coleman, was the first guy to use it. But Butch certainly worked on that to the point of giving up the cornet, which was mad because he was one of my favorite cornet players ever. But anyway, and I very carefully put together what was at that time quite an unusually diverse orchestra in terms of age, gender, race, musical background, and nobody acted in the way I expected them to, which was good. But I thought, for instance, the classical people would respond easily to Butch Morris's baton. In fact, most of them really disliked it, which was really a surprise. I thought, oh, there's somebody waving a baton that they do. Surely they're used to that. And you know, who got drunk? Who drank the really horrible? In Bristol, we had this awful cheap shandy, or not shandy, sherry. And who drank that was interesting, who didn't, who went home, who was pissed off, who wasn't pissed off, who made a huge fuss, who didn't make a huge fuss. All these were very interesting. And a year after that, it became the people who had enjoyed it, particularly me, Ian Smith, the trumpet player, and Evan Parker, the saxophone player, went, oh, we'd like to do this again. We just like being in a large group. And of course, Evan had already been in various large groups, Barry Guy's band, the Brotherhood of Breath. Amazing. I mean, there's a whole book to be written just about the interactions in Brotherhood of Breath. I liked it when Lowell Coxwell and Evan were both playing tenor saxophones, but Lowell made the mistake of bringing his soprano instead, and he never got another gig. He's somebody who didn't know what he had. Lowell Coxwell was an amazing tenor player.
Oh, Lowell.
He sounded like a lecherous Bud Freeman. You know, and I think this is another thing musicians have to do. We have to look at what our strengths are, even if we think they're rubbish. I can play really good ocarina, but I hate ocarinas. Well, maybe that could come in handy one day, you know. I can't, by the way, but it's just an example. But also social. Oh, me. I'm sorry, I have to go and get the groceries. So, carry on.
That's okay.
There we are. There's everyday improvisation. Improvisation in everyday life. Whoops. Whatever arises. Yeah.
There's a question from George Burt that I think is quite interesting here. We should not sideline our role as entertainers, sources of creative distraction from a workaday world, sources of expressive agency. And that reminds me, as we were talking about Butch Morris, I was thinking of Derek Bailey and Derek Bailey's incredible way of being, at the one time, an entertainer, but also a very strong conceptualist around what he was doing. And I remember reading a story, Maggie, you might actually have been at this concert, but apparently Derek Bailey wheeled on a television one night on stage, and Oscar Peterson was playing on stage, and he put Oscar Peterson on, and he said, my mother always wanted me to play a concert with Oscar Peterson, and tonight I will. And he improvised with Oscar Peterson while Oscar Peterson was on the television. But he had that incredible way of being funny, but also very serious about his practice. And to go back to George's point about this idea of a role as an entertainer, sources of expressive agency.
But is that again tied into ideas of quality though, and you know, entertaining for who? I mean, maybe we think we're entertaining, but you know, no one's buying it. You know, you're trying to sell it.
Even entertainers have some fans and not. You know, I mean, even comedians. You know, I think it's okay. You can be an entertainer. Not everybody will be entertained, but it's okay. You know, like some comedians you love, and other comedians they just don't resonate with you. So I think maybe the point George is making is just in general that, you know, that element is not to be underestimated or dismissed.
Is it about intent? Are you intending to do some like crazy social experiment, or are you intending to like express something musically? I think it's a second one actually, and the first one's a byproduct.
And
I think when we talk about
it depends on your background, because I mean I've got a background as an entertainer, so it does come out. I mean, I used to get into terrible trouble when I was younger because I think a lot of improvisers thought I was dragging the aesthetic into the mud. now I'm older, I can do it. And everybody goes, oh, wow, she's integrating all these different things. And there's people write papers on it. But I had horrendous critics, you know, really awful things written about me. And it was just because that was my experience. So that would come out when I was performing. I'd do a bit of tap or a bit, you know. But the first time that happened, it was by accident. It was because I was lying in a gig and I found myself thinking I was lying. And I didn't know, I was too young to know just to stop and be silent. And it was all crazy. And I found myself saying it out aloud. And in saying I'm lying to the whole audience, I suddenly started dancing. And I used to be a dancer. So suddenly the dancing came into it. So I don't think that intention, yes, of course, intention is there. But I know with me, I find a lot of things completely accidentally. And then go, oh. I think accidents are great, actually.
Yeah.
And mistakes.
I think, like for me, you've got to be enjoying what you're doing, and then maybe some of it will spill over. Bugger them, you know. Like just like I'm not going to do stuff unless I'm having fun. You want to be your own best company, really, if you want to play this music properly, I think. And then another thing, just backtracking on something. There was a thing that came up as you were talking about doing stuff with people with superpowers. I work with people with superpowers, non-verbal people. And Greta Thunberg said to have a difference, it's a superpower. So I now call everyone I work with, they've all got superpowers. And I think that's much better. But I was telling an improvising musician, oh, so what do you do? I said, oh, I'm just stuck in a cupboard with non-verbals pretty much most of my time. And we're making music, and it's really interesting because some of them, you're playing with them and they're doing these really cool things that you wouldn't have even thought of, and they do it with like guitars and with their voice and with instruments, and it's just like, this is awesome. It's the same feeling as you get if you go see Evan play, and he's doing all that magic on his sax. And it was like, yeah, it's amazing. And then I got it's an amazing, oh, that must be so rewarding. And it was like, I kind of lumped that along with, oh, you're such an inspiration. And I just thought, yeah. And
we really have to change our language, don't we?
It's the language, and also the
habits of mind that go with it, the classifications.
It's the de-hierarchization of this.
Yes.
Because yes, it's great to go listen to Evan and Steve play, and you, Maggie, and things like that. But it's also great to go play with everybody. Yeah, you know.
Absolutely.
If you're alive, you can play music.
Oh. Yes.
There you go.
Absolutely.
I'll shut up now.
I totally no. Pardon. I totally agree with you. I absolutely feel, you know, and they're just different experiences, but they have equal value. They've got
equal value, just
and I think that
value.
Somebody posted something on Facebook. Yeah, that's what I mean. When I say equal, I mean they're equally valuable to me. I don't mean they're some sort of static thing. Yeah, equally valid or whatever. Yeah. No, I agree with. Because I've gone to community theatre and things, and just as an audience, and they thrilled me. Yeah. You know, as much, if not more, than some of the, you know,
it's the authenticity. If it's authentic, and and it works, then it's good music.
To come back to cooking, it has
cooking. Yeah, it's to do. You know, you might have a bag of flour and a potato, and then you're just going to make this amazing thing.
Yeah, and your ability to appreciate and to know how to render things. Yeah, you know, all the specifics. You can find beauty anywhere if you you know, engage.
Yes.
And go back and forth a bit.
Oh, great. I'll pay Guru later. Thanks.
That's fine. It's also covered the idea of the shared intersubjectivities of quality from PA.
Yes. Yes. Well, and when it's inevitable, we've all got our likes and our dislikes, our prejudices and of course, and we've got different culture, class, race, all of that comes into it as well. Of course, you can't get away from that. But I still think it's important. You know, there's somebody posted something on Facebook, you know, I can't remember, there was a pyramid and it had one person on top and then I think it was probably a man, and then there was a women, and then there was dogs, and then there was cats, and right at the bottom were insects. And it was very much about, this is important. Then there was another one where there was everything was just teeming with life in a much more kind of like fluent way, and sort of, and that is the difference. I mean, I don't think nature's hierarchical. I know a lot of people like to say, like Jordan Peterson. I thought I have to check him out because I've heard so much about him, but he talks about lobsters and the top, not just the top dog, but the top lobster. And I thought, oh goddess almighty. That it's somehow hierarchies are inbuilt. He believes that hierarchies are inbuilt, and they're part of natural. We're wired to be hierarchical.
Check out Professor Robert Sapolsky's baboons. There was a time where the alpha baboons ate some poison rubbish and died. And then it was basically the hippie Quaker, he explained it differently, this was my spin on it, the hippie Quaker Taoist baboons that then would just hang out and groom each other, and it was all very equal. It's a bit like The Gathering, really. And and then when they did test science on them, they were testing their blood and stuff. They didn't have as much disease, they were more relaxed. And it's on his behavioural biology talks. And it's because they changed the narrative from this hierarchical kind of class baboons of upper, middle, and lower class baboons, and they were all the same, and they'd all just hang out. And then teenage baboons, they leave one troop because they get thrown out for being rowdy, and then they have to join another troop. And then teenage baboons from normal baboon societies would go to this hippie haven. And then they'd start acting all nice and friendly. So
That's lovely.
It's about being the right kind of baboon. Yeah.
And the right kind of environment, in it as well, and conditions, definitely.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could bring Jessica in at this point, if that's not too.
Oh, please, yes.
Because I was
Baboons, thanks.
well, actually, maybe not on baboons, but I was thinking more on the broader issue about aesthetics and the notion that how do we engage people in talking about the aesthetics of improvisation? Because I think you've got a lot of experience of teaching in an art school context and dealing with these issues of aesthetics, improvisation, and technology as well. So I wonder how do you sort of tackle that?
So thank you for this amazing conversation and the festival that we're having today, and thank you for bringing me in. Well, I think we basically start off with, we acknowledge that, like my course that I'm a program leader of the undergrad Sound for Moving Image course, we've got people that want to have a career, for example, doing post-production sound for film. So like Hollywood maybe, for example, or working in broadcasting TV. But we also have students that just love sound and they're not sure what they want to do, or they're really interested in filmmaking, or just art making in general, but sound might be their medium. So I think a great leveler at the start, pre-COVID times, is that, the first day of term we go on a walk. We go on a walk throughout Glasgow. It's mostly, an icebreaker to get us to meet each other, but also to give everyone a shot of the different types of technology. Handing the most expensive boom recorder that we have to a nervous girl in the class that might not have held it before, and just having this kind of shared experience. But also importantly, like sometimes having the headphones on and just tuning into the sounds around you, going back to Tia's love of listening to the tap or the cars that are going on today. So their first exercise they do is working with sound alone. So they're not even thinking about the hierarchies of the sound being subordinate to the image, or sound serving to entertain, or sound serving a narrative even. They're allowed to make something that might involve the voice, something that might be quite abstracted. And when, obviously with COVID, we kind of pivoted to letting them go on a sound walk in their own locale or using the sounds of the home. And the work has not been diluted in any sense. And I think, but yeah, that's the main point, that we start off with addressing that a lot of sounds can be musical. And, you know, it's almost, we do mention John Cage quite a lot, but we also look at some of the acoustic ecologists, but more importantly, looking at the participatory artists and thinkers like Linda O'Keeffe, Jacqueline Waldock, people that give sound recorders to children, sound recorders to people in council flats that are way down, and they need to try and preserve these aspects of the sonic environment that may be overlooked in mainstream sound maps, let alone mainstream narratives. So that's how I try and approach it. Like we basically acknowledge that there are hierarchies and that there are imbalances in the industry, rather than just trying to like
absolutely
not cover them because it's awkward. Like we just bring it forward and we have discussions about it, and they write about it, they make work about it. And then technology, of course, is there. Like we're really happy with all the kit we have, but especially this year, we're aware that students might have a phone. They might they've got to have some form of technology to attend our classes, to be online. But the main thing is that they produce fascinating work that is insightful, and there's even less of a hierarchy about a work being of more value because it's using expensive kit that's from our school. You know, that we enable the access to it if that's a choice that they'd like to take, but we also want to enable students who don't feel comfortable moving about in the middle of a pandemic and traveling just to get a piece of it. So I think that's what you were asking about, technology and sound. Is that right?
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Great answer. And I guess it goes back to one of the first points that we made about technology, and particularly the technology that we're using right now, changing the way that we think about ourselves as even creative people, changing the way in which we're interacting. Maria, you've had a lot of experience of this over the past few months, particularly in working with the visuals. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on it.
Sorry, I was just reading what George just said. Can you repeat that?
All right, so
I wasn't paying
sorry,
attention.
Maria, that was another very directional question there. I was thinking about the how technology is used to change our consciousness, or how this period that we've been using Zoom a lot, is changing how we see ourselves as creative people.
I think that it isn't even the technology. I think the technology is the mode that we're in, but I think that it is inherently just the adaptability that which we have trained in our field. That's what I see us as being skilled at. It's adaptability. And because this is the new mode, that's where I see us doing a new type of adaptability. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess because Tia, you originally made the point in the discussion with George about technologies and ontology, the ontology of music as a flexible object, and I guess that's.
I mean, I think what's so lovely about this time, and what I hope we'll remember if we do go back to the old normal or whatever you call it now, is how vital any connection is at the moment when we're, in isolation. It forces everyone, not just in GIO and not just on Zoom, but everywhere, to be really resourceful. And it helps, at least it's helped me to reflect a lot about how I maybe sometimes unreflectively thought about what music I really loved or wanted to hear, or what I thought was mere entertainment, versus, and all these things. It's caused me to think about genres blurring quite a lot. But more, I think, particularly, I think it's caused us to see more of how resourceful we can be to connect. And it, in a sense, in response to something I see on the chat coming through from the people that aren't part of us, there's this question from George Bird about, is it our responsibility to make interesting sounds, right? In a sense, what counts as an interesting sound, right, has everything to do with how this is a John Cage point about responsibility, has everything to do with not just how it's heard, like by us subjective individuals, but by what is then done with it. There's beautiful stuff in conversation analysis that highlights how if a person is deemed to be making sense, it's in part because other people down the line, as the utterance happens, during it and after it, it's responded to in ways that are, socially caring. And I think that's an important word. And I think adaptation and caring are two key words for me that are now part of much more explicitly, of my vocabulary about how I recognize something that I think is, and we'll come back to the word and say it again, really beautiful. And I'm saying it in a way that does not presume that there is a hierarchy of beauty. 18th century, they had a pyramid of composers as well.
Horrible triangles.
Yeah, more triangles. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
You know what's lovely about one of John Stevens' pieces, Triangle, because it's not actually in a pyramid, it's actually, you're just sitting in a triangle, but each person is only listening to the other two people. So it's a beautiful way of just everybody listening to everybody, rather than the usual thing when one person is excluded. That just made me think about that when suddenly, that, because he really, John was a master of mixed ability. That's where I learned my love of mixed ability and community from John, and also from Peter Oliver, who did the same thing with the Church of England Youth Club at the Oval House, and then totally brought in fringe theatre and radical things and kept the youth, kept the locals. It was one of those rare community centres that isn't just some middle class thing plonked into the middle of a working class neighbourhood. It was complete. So I was very lucky to have roles, like in John and also in Peter Oliver. But yes, so Triangle, yes, it is interesting, that thing of learning just how magical everybody is, how brilliant everybody is.
Just a point that's come up in the chat. It's about accessibility. And
accessibility, yeah.
That the technologies that we have can make music connections, what we can share with people, really accessible. Just briefly, I've got some students at the Conservatoire in Glasgow who are doing a kind of like music leadership workshop, which is kind of a bit neoliberal, but it's like basically like a community music workshop, and they're going into care homes and hospitals, but they are remote. They're doing it on a screen with the people, but also from each other. So they can't do like synchronized stuff. So they've really had to like go out the box and think of and keep adapting, keep changing, and keep thinking about this. But I think the point here is it's really forced them to think about how they can be musical and be communicative in different ways. And I'm hoping that they're going to take this forward to their careers, even if they become like classical musicians in orchestras, and like really work with that. But there's a point, how can we maintain this accessibility and extend this accessibility further post Brave New World, not Brave New World, but new normal?
Yeah, because Farah and me were talking about that in the chat, weren't we, about how a lot of people don't have access to the internet. So already there's a digital exclusion.
Yeah, technical.
And that's really something. Yeah.
So, thinking of there's another. I'm looking through the questions to see if there was another question that came in earlier from Guru about is it negative experiences?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just wanting to Can idealizing positive experiences create a bigger alienation in people who may not immediately identify with the idealized narrative?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I was thinking.
We have to take care with
Then
idealizing
that's why I
marriage.
think it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
how
why
do we not
need
do that?
to be, as I was
Yeah.
saying. Yeah. That's why we have to co-create, you know, and not, you know, but also I think that we'll look a lot of this in mental health, because we're looking about not just peers, you know, co-production, which is the buzzword with mental health professions, but patient leadership, or actual service user and carer leadership. Because when people who've been oppressed take a lead, generally speaking, it's not always the case, but you take a lead in order to share power, a bit like Jeremy Corbyn would say, we want power in order to share it. And there's a difference between sort of people who have power because they want to keep it, and people who've been disempowered, you know, obviously given the right conditions, because it's difficult within a capitalist system not to then be co-opted into the hierarchy, of course. And we see that over and over again with partnership boards where, you know, we are reps, we sit on these partnership boards as service user reps and carers reps, and all the professionals, they love, you know, but basically we can become tokens, you know. So there's lots of contradictions in this. This is why I think grassroots autonomous movements are so important, you know, so that we don't actually just get co-opted. And yeah. So all these issues, yes, Guru, I think, you know, it's up to us, I think, to sort of be what Una was saying, be mindful of it, be mindful of that.
And if people are in a position where they're working like in a therapeutic capacity, I mean, one of the things that I've been observing for years now with my research partner, Gary Ansdell, is just how exquisitely crafted he is at not going too fast, you know, waiting, getting a sense of what the other person might be able to do, want to do, not feel comfortable in doing. There's a beautiful literature out there about how often clients, you know, that's not a good word, but clients in music therapy situations will be polite, you know, and they'll do the same old songs that the therapist thinks they love when they don't really necessarily love it at all, but, you know, they don't want to disappoint the music therapist. So, you know, how do you sensitize yourself to be aware of the other? And that's, to me, that is like one of the core things about improvised music. It's listening and being open and tentatively experimenting in very small ways. And it's really, ultimately, that's about intimacy.
That's a great point in terms of about the notion of intimacy. But in an artistic and creative sense as well, because I think improvisation as a process not only facilitates that type of close collaboration, but it necessitates that type of close collaboration.
That's, to me, what exploratory to me means, exactly that.
But also being aware of the other when the other can be changing according to situation, context, moods, what they're playing. And these are the things that maybe other forms of music are more fixed in.
Yes.
And this is perhaps maybe what's different, or can be different, or should be different about improvisation, and can still happen over Zoom, perhaps.
Yes, it's hard. Yes, I mean, the one thing I think would be difficult, I remember when I was in Houston and with the organization Nameless Sound, and we went into a lot of places where, you know, there was music therapy, but we did it more as community musicians. And there was one place where we did 3 things in the same day. And the first one, there was a lot of boisterous people, exactly what you were saying, Tia, you know, in one context, it was like, whoa, it was wild. And then we went, and then we went into this another room where people were just mainly in wheelchairs, pretty much, you know, very quiet, very still, but making sounds. And it was like, there's no way we can just impose some sort of formula here. And this is what improvisation it's great. So we just sat in silence, basically, just sat in silence and listened and just responded to the sounds. And it was the most extraordinary experience, one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, actually. And it was frightening because, you know, you're thinking I'm supposed to go in there with these instructions, and you thought, no, just let it go and just sit and be and just be and read and feel the energy and follow the energy. That was one of the things John always talked about, following the energy. And I think it's great, you know, just be
Midwifery.
And respond.
Like midwifery, in a sense.
Eh?
You know, midwifery. being with.
Yes.
Mm.
Apparently that's what somebody said. Oh, I can't remember. Sort of a survivor of psychiatry, one of the militants in the Mad Pride movement. I think he said something about that. The original meaning was a therapist or something, or was kind of like to bring something like that. It was a form of midwifery. So that just reminded me.
I can see some of our Geo friends joining us here now. According to the schedule, this part of the this part of the day finishes at 5:30, and so there's a gap. But what we've been doing over the course of the festival is that whenever there's a gap, or if a gap emerges for whatever reason, we've been having what we call emergency improvisations. So at this point, I think we're going to. Oh, I should say thank you to everybody that's taken part in our discussion, and a special thank you to Tia for taking the time to record the discussion with George. It was a fascinating.
Yes, it was. It was wonderful, Tia.
Really.
Wonderful.
My thanks are all to you. So many wonderful things have come out of it. So from my point of view, thank you.
And George, I wanted to say more hello to George. I thought he'd still be here. Oh,
George was one of the very big, wonderful things. Yes.
George is amazing. I love George. He was one of the first musicians to treat me with a kind of respect, well, I won't go into that, but it was him and Anthony Braxton. We hung out when me and Irena did a gig somewhere, and it was just such an amazing experience. It was decades ago, but it was lovely. Yeah, a wonderful man.
But also, I think that what's great is hearing the stories from Steve and the stories from yourself about connecting these issues that are absolutely current and absolutely contemporary right now with, and for want of a better phrase, with the origins of the music, to go right back to the start of the music and talk about the journey.
Yes.
Come on.
We didn't invent everything.
Yeah. And I think that's it's a privilege, I think, for us to hear these stories as well and feel that connection with through yourselves and through the sharing of these stories. Yeah, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Maggie, for that.
My pleasure, please.
So,
Steve, you're great. It's so lovely to know each other.
Yeah, thank you to everybody out. It's very meta here because I know we're discussing a pre-recorded discussion, but everybody out there has asked us questions and taken part in the debate as well. Thank you very much. So now, the true improvisatory style. We're going to continue the discussion, but we'll continue the discussion musically. I can see more and more people joining in.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, welcome to everybody that's on the Zoom session. So what's going to happen? We're going to start playing, and we'll play till 6 o'clock, and then at 6 o'clock we'll move back. In fact, I should a big shout out to Sean, who's actually working.
Oh, Sean is amazing.
Hey.
Sean.
Thank you so much, Sean.
John Blizzard, who's making the tech all happen. What will happen at 6 o'clock is that back to the pre-recorded part of the program, and I'm actually shuffling around my desk looking for the program here just to.
Oh yes, it'd be good. Now I can. What's going on afterwards? Yes.
So
is it Renee?
At 6 o'clock, it's Chicago's Rennie Baker.
Oh, wonderful!
Modern Orchestra and some of Rennie's.
Yes.
But don't worry, there'll be another introduction from Jessica, who's done all our introductions for
brilliantly.
So what I'm going to stop talking, and then rather than I'll just stop talking, and then we'll merge into playing some music for half an hour. So thank you all for joining us.
Yes, and Sean will give us, like he always does brilliantly. He'll tell us,
we'll aim for 6 o'clock. But what Sean will do is he'll just fade us out.
Just take you away.
Okay. Here we go. Thanks very much.
Thank you.